Business owners of Reddit, what's the most obnoxious reason an employee quit, had to be fired over? A pawn shop employee stole $400 from the cash register, then realized that there were video cameras. He had no idea where the security footage was stored, so in order to cover his tracks, he set the store on fire. He actually ended up getting pretty badly burned in the process and went to jail right after the hospital. Story 2. Had a guy who we hired who showed a lot of potential. Sales. He was a little arrogant and had a good-sized ego, but wasn't enough of a problem. He was very good at sales, and eventually it went to his head. He started showing up late all the time, leaving early, cutting corners where he could. The final straw came when he showed up late, and someone spoke up about it to him. He decided the best choice of words he could yell were, "I make the most sales and I have the biggest penis, so you can all duck off." He was fired on the spot. Customers thought it was pretty funny, though. Story 3. I used to own a bakery and a woman quit because she blamed her yeast infection on a bad batch of yeast I bought from China. I may be a guy, but I don't think that's how it works. Story 4. The company I work is a contractor for a giant corporation, and we go to different stores to do work. This new guy we hired seemed normal at first, but it turned out he was a complete ducking idiot. So one day, he goes on site with one of the senior employees to shadow him. This genius thought that because we did work for the giant corporation, we could just eat anything off the shelves and from the refrigerators free. Well, employee saw this and was like, "UTF, are you doing, you need to pay," and manager comes. This guy then started fighting with the manager, then got in his car after and drove off. Needless to say, his ass was fired the next day. Story 5. I used to manage a store in the mall. One of my employees, I'm pretty sure, was cheating on her husband with a mall security guard. I would come by on my days off and he'd scurry out in a fluster. I never mentioned it, but the guy was coming by all the time to the point that it was keeping her from doing her job. Finally, we had a work meeting and I said in a very non-accusatory way, something like this: "I know it gets slow in here during the week, and I'm guilty of it myself, but from now on, I need everyone to keep personal visits to a minimum, or during your lunch break." She stands up and starts screaming at me. How dare I accuse her? I'm a git. She quits. She continued to call me and leave me harassing voicemail for a while too. Story 6. Tool and die shop owner here. One of our machinists would go out for lunch and slam back 3, 4 beers every day. When I found out, I told him he can't drink beer at lunch. He said it was his time and what he did at lunch was his business, not mine. The next day, he came back from lunch smelling like beer. I let him go on the spot. A few years later, he showed up in my office asking for his old job back. He said that he was an alcoholic back then and was sorry for his behavior. He was now sober and needed a job. I hired him on the spot and it worked out great for 5 or 6 years. Then he started drinking again and I had to let him go a second time. I have no idea how he is doing now, but I often wonder. He was a great machinist and a nice guy when he was sober. Story 7. I worked for a boutique hotel, small, cute, expensive AF, as an ops manager. Basically, unless the area manager had to come in, I was the law. I get a frantic call on my downtime from an employee claiming our overnight guy tried to assault him. I have a sigh, as the guy freaking out is notorious for being a drama queen. I load up the security camera on my home PC, go to the time frame, and crap. Our night guy legitimately lunged at his coworker and tried to beat him. Luckily, a desk was between them, and that gave him time to bolt. Instantly felt like a banana for doubting him. Well, this is when I call in the area manager. We show up at the ass crack of dawn and speak with the dude who made the attack, and he claims he didn't do it. We show him the video, and I crap you not. He responds with, "I don't recall the events of that evening." We fired him on the spot. What started the fight, you ask? Well, the victim had done extra work to make the attacker's shift easier. The attacker felt like this was an insult to his work ethic. Oh, and I got multiple reference requests from similar hotels asking for a good reference. I simply said I wasn't able to provide a positive reference, as legally that was all I could say. Story 8. Years ago, like in the 90 EOS, my husband worked for a small company. He did a little bit of everything, and one of his jobs, along with a coworker, was keeping all the computers running. Now this was a sales-based company, so all of the salespeople had laptops for themselves. If there was an issue or problem, they'd bring them in to be looked at. So one day, one of the non-local sales guys was in for a meeting. He said, "Hey, my computer is running really slowly. Can you take a look at it?" My husband says, "Yeah, sure, no problem." Sales guy leaves the computer and goes to whatever meeting he was off to. My husband and his colleague take a look and see that the disk is nearly full and figured that was slowing things down. They dig deeper and see the computer is filled with adult films. Like filled with it. Adult films of all sorts. Nothing illegal per se, but very close to it. Now mind you, the salespeople signed an agreement that their assigned computer was for business use only, not personal use. So, we have a slight problem here. My husband and his colleague, not wanting to make a mountain out of a molehill, and not wanting the guy to lose his job over a fixable problem, just wiped the drive clean, reformatted it, got things set up again, and the computer was working great. The guy comes back the next day, and my husband goes, "Hey, sales guy, we took a look at your computer. It was running slowly because the disk was nearly full with personal files, so we wiped it clean, reformatted things, and you're good to go." You know, just a reminder that our company-issued computers are for business use only. If you're looking for something for personal use, here are some relatively inexpensive laptops with a lot of storage space. You can put whatever you want on it. Small investment for privacy, you know? And with that, they gave him a printout list of some good, reasonably priced laptops he could purchase for himself. The sales guy just kind of mumbled something, grabbed his computer, and was on his way without so much as a thank you. Well, the guys figured that was that, but guess who was back 6 weeks later with a not working at all computer? Yep, idiot. Problem? Yep, computer was again filled with adult porn. They were done at this point. The two of them went straight to the president's office, showed her what was on the computer, well enough to give her an idea, and explained what had happened previously. She was a very no-nonsense lady, so needless to say, by 3 p.m. that afternoon, that sales guy was no longer employed. What an idiot. Story 9. We hired someone to do video, photo media work. After a certain point, he felt it was selling out and didn't want to do media commercially. He wanted to do business stuff. We asked him which role he would like. If he picked his role, we'd try it out. If he didn't, he would quit. He decided to quit. He couldn't come up with a role. Story 10. About a year ago, I hired a guy who was down on his luck, went against my best judgment. Due to the nature of my business, I usually don't hire people that fit his profile, out of shape, poor hygiene, etc. It wasn't long before I started hearing complaints from female employees and clients. Turns out that he would often attempt to flirt with women, and when turns down, he would lose his mind and call them terrible names and insults. I don't tolerate that crap, so I gave him a very stern warning. The very next day, I found one of my sweetest female employees visibly upset. Upon inquiring, she said that idiot had followed her home yesterday to make sure she got home safely, then showed up this morning to escort her to the office. She was genuinely scared. I called him into my office and told him to scram. He threatened to file a complaint with the Department of Labor for discrimination against men who have an innate need to protect women. Didn't matter. Told him to beat it, and now I'm fighting the stupid claim with the doll. Story 11. I used to do some consulting work and hired a woman to help out, mostly clerical stuff and whatnot. I flew down to St. Thomas for a meeting and got a call from Sonatrol at 10:30 p.m. She had keys to my building, but didn't know about the alarm. Basically, she and her boyfriend brought another couple down to have a group sex in one of my offices I had converted to a bedroom where I could crash if I worked late. So I called her. She answered mid-coitus and acted normal, albeit a little tipsy. I talked about a few mundane details I needed to relay to her anyways, and then mentioned to make sure she only was ever at the office between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. since there was a silent alarm that would call me with audio of activities in the building. When I got back in town, her keys were sitting on my desk. Story 12 had a guy on a location fake an injury. Now, mind you, he did injure himself severely accidentally, but that wasn't his plan. His plan had been to fake a minor injury and get put on workers' comp. The problem was, he screwed up how to do it and ended up hurting himself severely. You ask, how did you know he was trying to fake injure himself? Well, that's very easy to explain. We had a 20-minute tape of him hiding behind one of the trucks on the work site, practicing his fall. Then a written confession from friends, saying that he'd been planning it since the day we hired him. Story 13. Not my business, but my dad's. He hired predominantly people with criminal records, and literally all they had to do was inspect rental cars for damage as the cars left the lot and keep their noses clean. You could do pretty much anything you wanted on your downtime with no complaints from my dad, as long as he didn't get any complaints from the owners of the car lot. One day, one of the supervisors for the car lot I worked for walks out and asks me for my dad's number. Supervisor had caught a guy stealing gas from the property. He even had security camera footage of it happening. Dude was instantly fired. Story 14. Not a business owner, but at a previous job, we had issues with food being stolen from the break room fridge. The company made a big stink about it, and it kept happening, so they very obviously installed security cameras in the break room. Like big damn cameras in plain sight, pointing at the fridge with our bosses being very direct about, "There is the camera. You really want to lose your job over eating someone's sandwich." A few days later, guy gets fired for stealing food. Literally on camera, just grabbing people's lunch out of the fridge and eating it. Story 15. Don't own a business, but work on employee claims and lawsuits. A guy filed a discrimination complaint against the company after he got fired for stealing hot dogs from the refrigerator. This warehouse, big company, this was not at my location, kept a stock of hot dogs for employee appreciation picnics, usually weekly cookouts. No one knew why they were disappearing, so announcements were made and all employees were asked to not eat the hot dogs. And if they wanted some, they could ask, but couldn't have several packs. That didn't work, so warnings were announced. Finally, a camera was installed near the refrigerator and he got caught red-handed. He was just practically inhaling the hot dogs directly from refrigerator that buy the packs. After he was fired, he filed a discrimination claim on the basis of disability due to his weight. I sent the response with a video of him eating the hot dogs. Also, he couldn't prove his weight was a disability under the ADA, and weight is not a protected class. We won that claim. Story 16. Employee had corporate card, charged a vacation, purse, fossil watch, takeout, along with overall being miserable to work with. Had laptop stolen within weeks of joining. Fired her, and a few days later, a watch catalog from Fossil showed up at the office with her name on it. Have active court cases for all the theft. Story 17. The one that instantly jumps to mind was the woman who was fired day 2 of a call center training course because she wouldn't stop touching herself. Not sure how she got through her screening. This was for a wireless phone company too, not a chat line or anything. She was late 30 Alsace, early 40s, and I don't think this was an employment scam or anything of the like, and more likely just a mental compulsion or substances. It was really not that subtle, but done under a shawl or scarf thing tied over her lap. Politely and quietly asked to stop by the trainer, then stopped momentarily but started up again 20 minutes later. Story 18? Back when I had my translation business, I hired a guy to seek out contracts for me. I'd pay him 20% finder's fee. Instead of sending the finished project to a client, he accidentally sent naked pictures of himself. I learned of it when my client forwarded me the mail half an hour later, including the multiple gloriousness. Story 19. I had a subcontractor on a job for my company. Try and convince the client that they should dump me and go with their business, and they would undercut me by 10%. Learned this from the client, who asked me to find another person to service our contract. Story 20. My dad owned his own business working as a color corrector, editor. He had this one employee who had been there since day one and ended up becoming similar to an assistant manager. My dad owned that company for 10 plus years, and just recently, he had to fire the assistant manager because apparently he was telling employees and customers that my dad hates his kids, his whole family, that he's a terrible person, etc. Basically driving all business away, pushing my dad's company towards bankruptcy. Turns out he was a sociopath. My dad's just sad his employees never trusted him enough to tell him about what this guy would say to them. Story 21. My dad and I ran a business together cleaning out foreclosed homes for a real estate agency as I was finishing high school. I was a senior, so I got out at lunchtime and we could usually get a house done in a half day. Sometimes we'd get some bad ones, and we had a few guys that we would call to see if they wanted to make a quick $100 for a day's work. On my literal last day of class, my dad picked up one of our usual guys and got one house about 90% done by lunch. He was a pretty normal guy that we had never had any trouble with. The guy we paid to help my dad went out to the truck and came back into that house with a gun and robbed my dad of his wallet and took his keys and left in our truck. Funny thing is, my dad only had the cash he was about to give him an hour later for finishing up the house. The state police got the guy's number from us. And they told him some bogus story about how my dad was being investigated for not paying his workers. And if met them with the truck, they would get his statement and let him go. Idiot pulls up and gets arrested on the spot. He got 8 years in prison. Story 22. I know somebody they had to take a substances test, so he brought a little sample jar of substances free piss with him, went into the toilet, came out, gave the fake sample to whoever was doing the test, and got fired on the spot. The sample was cold. Fresh piss is hot. Story 23. We had a young interns helping with some hardware inventory tasks. It wasn't uncommon for laptops not to make it back to us as projects would hoard them from terminated employees. But one day we noticed his backpack open and a laptop of a model we used sticking out. Sent him to the other side of the building and checked the serial number, and yep, it was one he reported as missing during a recent inventory. Opportunistic theft is one thing, but bringing it back into the office every day, just wow. Story 24. Obligatory, not a business owner, but my wife's cousin worked with me and her father at our work, landscaping, for a couple months. He had previous experience and we needed the help, so we hired him, despite warnings to the owner from my father-in-law that he was an idiot. To name a couple of things. We were putting fresh mulch in one of the industrial parks that we maintained, and he had me close the doors to the bed of the truck, after which he raised the bed so all the mulch would slide to the back. Except the doors weren't designed for that type of load and immediately sprang open. If they hadn't hit the ground while swinging open, they would have royally ducked up the cars on either side of us. He then proceeded to call the owner of the company and tell him what happened, placing all the blame on me for not closing the doors right. Took him on a paver job, and he insisted that he could cut pavers with our wet saw, except he didn't use gloves. So the material from the pavers being cut, which includes some nasty stuff, absolutely destroyed the skin on his hands. And he called out for the next 2 days because he couldn't move his fingers. This was not the first time that he had made this mistake. Same paver job, which called for Belgium block to be installed along the driveway. He decided it would be a good idea to mix the mortar and the sand for the base on the owner's freshly paved driveway and use it as he needed it. Except it rained the day he did so, and he ended up with a 3/4-ton block of what was essentially concrete in the middle of their, again, freshly paved driveway. On multiple occasions, we got reports from the grass-cutting crew that he went out with, that he did nothing all day except sit in the truck, text his wife, and smoke cigarettes. He thought he could get away with this because neither myself nor my father-in-law were with him. Eventually, he was fired, and we got a couple extremely nasty but entertaining phone calls from his wife, calling all of us some choice names while vowing that we were no longer part of his family. Story 25. I'm not a business owner, but this happened to one of my coworkers. Guy was extremely nerdy, and this is from a self-admitting nerd and absolutely obsessed with Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Literally the only things he would ever talk about, and would talk about them for as long as you'd let him. One day I'm on register, and I see him being dragged out of the store by cops in handcuffs. Turns out he had been shoplifting tons of playing cards of those above listed games. At least $500 worth, as our store policy was to let an employee get away with it up to that amount before busting them. I think because the charges stick harder or something. Story 26. Not me, but my dad. His worker asked if he wanted to assist in making meth. He no longer works for him. Him and his girlfriend got busted for making meth, serving 5 years. Story 27. Committing no notable offense, but faking incompetence or causing inconvenience in order to be fired and receive severance pay. Edit. Yes, I'm familiar with Better Call Saul. I love it, but as it turns out, and hold on to your seats for this, that being in a hole for money is not exclusive to the show. Story 28. A new heavy mechanic was hired, claimed to have prior experience. He was hired because he had a kid on the way and was in a bad spot financially, and the owners had a soft spot for unlucky people. Within a week, his nickname was Almost. He almost did the work correctly. He almost rewired an electrical system. He almost rebuilt an air dryer successfully. He almost mounted tires. The probability of the part he rebuilt failing within a week was a solid 60%. By the end of week 2, it was clear most of his knowledge was book-learned and not real-world. They wouldn't let him do anything except change oil. Once his probation period was up and he showed no improvement or drive, they let him go. Trucks only make money when they move, and he couldn't keep them moving. Story 29. I'm not a business owner, but I'm a student manager, aka. I don't really have the ability to fire someone, but I had to in this case. This one kid was trouble to say the least, and I asked him to go check the bathrooms to make sure they were clean, stocked. When he asked about the woman's room, I said just to knock and make sure nobody was inside. Apparently, he gets sex on the door and screamed in his very deep voice, "Who in here? Everybody gets out!" He then entered the bathroom where a poor little elderly woman was inside the stall and continued to bang on the stall yelling, "Get out!" He was yelling so loud I actually heard him and went to investigate. The poor woman was whimpering and calling the police, and he just was the kind of person who had no idea how he came across. There were many weird issues, but this obviously topped the cake, and I told him he was done and needed to go home. The poor old woman was so upset that she refused to leave the bathroom, and I had to call her son for her. Story 30. I was hiring for a government contract that required everyone to be substances tested. I told the guy in the interview that he would be substances tested, hired, failed the substances test, fired. When I told him he failed the drug test, he said, "Yeah, I knew I would." Story 31. I sold Kirby vacuum cleaners for a day. We drove around in a van and knocked at doors. The driver owned a franchise or something, so he would come in and close the deal. I sold one on my first day. I called him and he came in and asked the buyer if there was anything he did not like about the deal. Of course, the buyer said that the price was a little high. So the franchise owner knocked off my whole commission. His reasoning was that if I sold a couple more, I would be in some higher commission rate or something. I said, "Damn that," and took the tea home. Hounded him for weeks. He finally gave me the money after I showed up at his house at 1:30 a.m. Damn him, what an idiot. Story 32. Mobile home parks. Guy was hired on day 0, day 1. His 18M mom calls and says he got carried away with the celebrations, holiday, and woke up and found himself in jail day 4. He's out of jail and shows up to work first time day 16. Advise me if he ever doesn't show up for work. Call the jail. If he's there, then there is a roll of 20s in his drawer labeled bail fund. Please get him out day 30. Took some Xanax he had obtained somehow without telling us. I give him the job to use the tractor's front end loader and load my dump trailer with debris we were cleaning. Be back to dump it. Xanax kicks in, he ran into the same house 5 times with the tractor. Finished the job and parked the tracks inside the barn mostly. Day 40, 3 a.m. a tenant calls about the maintenance guy having fire and rescue at his house. Lived on site. Evidently, he had gotten drunk. While vacuuming behind the couch, he managed to flip it over on him. He couldn't get out from under it, but could reach cell phone and called fire and rescue to come get him out, and they did. Day 51, gets drunk, he's a minority. dresses up in a clown outfit and starts walking through town and the park in his outfit. You somehow makes it home covered in eggs, etc. Day 71, alcohol-based termination. Now he's doing well and steady job, etc. Probably the funniest person to work with and very productive, believe it or not. Story 33. Best story was from back in the day when I worked at a veterinary clinic. A girl got fired for basically hating cats and dogs. She said as a receptionist, she thought she would only have to talk to people. She didn't even like people. Thank goodness that manger switched into a different role. That wasn't even her worst hire. Story 34. At my old job, a grown-ass man quit for the reason of the job was too hard. This was washing dishes at a breakfast place on a Thursday. Yet the 17-year-old kid does it with no guiding. Story 35. Turned up drunk, fell asleep at the desk, harassed women in the bar after work. After we fired him, he hung around outside the offices. Came back and loitered a few days later too. Then sent me an SMS. You ruined my life. I'm going to ruin yours. 5 years later, tried to connect on LinkedIn, and a recruiter asked me for a reference. What the heck? A great worker would highly recommend. Oh, wait. Story 36. I don't own a business, but one of my friends once quit a job. I got him at the place I worked because it was too easy, even though he wasn't even doing half of the things he was supposed to do. And the few things he was doing poorly. Story 37. Not a business owner, but was a job site crew chief when this happened. I worked in restoration. For fire losses, we would pack out an entire house or affected area, soot, smoke, and burned items. This one job, the woman was a hoarder, and one of my techs, who was 37, finds bottle rockets from the late 80s and thinks it was a great idea to shoot them off in the customer's yard. Of course, since they are so old, they are duds, but he fires like 5 or 6 of them off before I told him to stop. The next day, we had a part-time kid who was like 17. He shot one off even after I told him not to. So the neighbor tells the homeowner, and the homeowner calls our owner to complain. When he writes up the 37YO, he tries to justify himself because the 17-year-old, who is young, knew, really stupid, and did it after he shot them off. So they both ended up getting fired. Don't mess with customers' stuff, it's not worth it. Story 38. I owned a pet store, and a young man came in looking for work. He seemed quite personable and had been a bit of a regular customer with his mom, so we gave him a chance. Turns out he's anaphylactic allergic to fish. And not just eating them, touching them. We sell live fish, fish food, which is made out of fish, cat and dog food with fish, etc. We were like, it's no problem. I have an EPI pen. No. You wouldn't look for a job at a peanut factory if you were allergic to nuts? I can't believe his mom even allowed it. Story 39. Not an owner, but in a supervisory role. We had a driver that refused to drive at night, claiming it wasn't safe. She was third shift. Her role was driver. This was all that was expected of her. Do the 3 to 7 trips a month that happened between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. This was after her pleading to be put on third shift. Our director at the time was shady, incompetent, not sure which, so this went on for 6 months longer than it should have. Story 40. Hired a crew to rehab a house. Guy says he's a painter. Okay, you're in the back bedroom first, hit it hard. Then the other 3 bedrooms. About 3 p.m. guy says he has to leave early, but will be working at 6 a.m. to make up. Guy arrives 10 a.m. He says he's heading back-to-back BR. I ask, to touch up? No, he says, to continue priming. I commented that he said he was a painter. Should have knocked out that room in 1-2 day and been on to the next, at least. He leaves, comes back, tells me I hurt his feelings. Now know this guy is living in a trailer, 3 kids and wife. I explain I can work with slow workers, untrained workers, even people who don't speak my language, but I cannot and will not work with wimps who cannot take direction because I hurt their feelings. I paid him for 2 full days, even though he only worked 7 in 2 days. All the other crew, 5, heard everything. Had great crew, all got fill day pay bonuses at end of 2-week project. Story 41. Mine is going to be buried because I'm so late, but an employee quit recently because she could not handle the burning of Notre Dame and felt like she needed to be with her mom during this time. We live in Mississippi. She has never been to Notre Dame. Story 42. A worked with a girl in retail who just could not arrive on time. Even with a 5-minute leniency rule, she still couldn't get there on time. We had a pretty generous tardy system, 8 tardies in 6 months, and then termination after that. We were having pretty high turnover, so this girl had more than 10, and no one had said anything to her. She even admitted she was usually on time, but would sit in her car and talk on the phone and end up late, or decide to hit a drive-through, knowing she didn't have time and end up late. One day she comes in, late as usual, and immediately gets called to the store manager's office. We assumed she was getting fired, but it turned out she was simply getting warned. In that moment, she decided to ask the manager if her tardy from that day counted. He fired her on the spot. Story 43. When I was working at this Japanese restaurant, we had to fire one of the new cooks his first day because he showed up drunk. I actually had to go pick him at the bus station because I was the delivery driver. When I pulled up there, I saw him finishing a tall boy of Bud Light. I was thinking, oh man, this might not be good. He got in the car and seemed okay. so I thought maybe it would be all right. When we got to the restaurant, I didn't see much of him because I was out in the front on the register, but man, did I hear a lot. While the owner, Carol, and the other cooks were training him on what to do, he kept ducking up and knocking things over. The final straw was when he accidentally lit a rag on fire. "That was it," she screamed. "You're fired! Get out!" She had me drive him back to bus station, and let me tell you, that was an incredibly awkward car ride. Story 44. New employee hired for basic administrative clerical role. Scan this, copy that, etc. After conversing with her, I find out it's her 7th job in the past 12 months. Whatever. We have a meeting with upper MGMT. She's asked to come in and take notes for one of the VPs. Broke his hand and unable to write or type. About 10 minutes in, she slumps noticeably onto the desk to take a snooze. Mr. Koo is surprised. Politely asks her to wake up. Girl, without skipping a beat, flips Mr. Koo the bird. She does not know Mr. Koo is the vocal type. He drops a binder next to her head so she wakes up, snatches the notepad, and tells her to get fo loudly. They have a screaming match. She leaves with security. She came back around lunchtime with hammer, presumably to smash Mr. Koo's car, but turned out to be Miss CFO's new car. Turns out Mrs. CFO is trained in some kind of martial arts. She grabs now ex-employee and throws her to the concrete ground. Ambulance is called. A VP says he will never piss off Miss CFO again. Story 45. So my dad ran a small side business as a logger, and I was his foreman whenever his main guys couldn't show. It was nice when I was able to skip school and make money at 13 years old. But this came with a drawback. Not many grown men respect the authority of a teenager on a job site. Well, one day, we're out of state and don't have any of our usual crew, so we decided to knock on some doors and hit up some homeless shelters to see if anyone wanted to make some money for the day. We put together a 3-man crew, excluding us, and we start the job. Now, since we weren't an above-ground business, it was really important that no one get hurt. So safety was priority above literally anything else. So I was the only one allowed to use the saws on the ground. Along comes Captain Big Shot. He knows everything already, so I couldn't teach him anything. All day he's been back-talking me. Whenever my dad was up in the tree, I'd tell him, go left, he'd go right. I'd tell him to get to work, he'd tell me go duck myself. I'd tell him not to use the saw, he'd scoff and keep using it. Charming guy. I'd resolved to tell him to hit the road after lunch when my dad called break. He pulls out the tailgate coffee maker and we take a load off. My dad walks off to take a piss and Big Shot tells me, "Hey kid, make yourself useful and refill your old man's saw." Now, maybe it was my teenage hormones, but I got a little pissed. Sorry, did I say a little? I was damn livid. "Hey, idiot, you don't tell me what to do. You've been talking crap all day. Hit the road, you're fired." We got into an argument that consisted of, "You can't fire me," followed by, "Damn you, yes I can." My dad comes back and asks what's going on. "You're going to let this kid fire me?" Without missing a beat. "Yeah, you're fired, get out here." He asked me later why I fired him and agreed. He was the only one on that crew that had a problem with me. The rest of them were just happy to have work. Story 46. Was just having a conversation with my granddad about when he used to own a business. He told me the only employee he regrets hiring was the son of an Army NCO during the Vietnam years. Apparently, this guy was a great candidate and seemed enthused to be applying for his first job, 18 at the time. My granddad offered him a job starting the next day, but warned him if he drove, he'd have to move his car every 2 hours to avoid the street parking fine. Anyway, he showed up to work the next day and set about learning the ropes. After 2 hours, my granddad tells him to move the car so he doesn't get in trouble. This kid goes to move his car and never comes back, much to my granddad's annoyance. Anyway, being the son of an army man himself, granddad calls in a favor and tracks down this kid's father. He tells the guy what happens and gets the kid's address. He goes over to find this guy smoking with his girlfriend and drinking, and the only explanation he offered was that he was bored. Needless to say, he didn't have a job and never got paid for those 2 hours. Story 47. No call, no show, second day of work. His mom called later for his paycheck and said he got locked up. He had a common name, so we missed the online article about his recent Met arrest. Worth noting that he passed a substances test and didn't report his arrest on his application. Story 48. Was not my company, but a store I was suddenly put in charge of when they fired the store manager. It was a store in a mall. The district manager was in town, hence the firing of the store manager, and decided he needed to hire another employee to fill the hours until he could find a useful manager. I wouldn't be manager, but I was the only employee of the store left. Well, this guy, we'll call him Danny, was notorious for working for nearly every store in that mall. He's worked at 5 different stores at separate times in the span of a year or less. Half the mall knows this guy, and no one really likes him. He's your classic 30-year-old spoiled dude who lives with his mom. Our git of a district manager decided he'd be a good addition to the team, against my protests. So, he was trained in by the district manager, and his final day of training was the day the DM was supposed to fly out. The next day, the DM flies out and instructs me to give him the key to the door so he could open and close by himself. His mom also worked in the mall, and he helped her out part-time at a survey place where they bug you to take a survey and offer to pay you like $2. So I went down to the survey place and tried to give him his key. He refused, said the job was too difficult for him. We bought gold, and it's not actually that difficult. And I spent most of my days actually playing WoW in the corner. Told me then that he quit and would not take the key. Then I had to call the district manager and tell him that he refused to take the key, said the job was too hard. Quit, and I was still the only employee of the store, and I was part-time. Story 49. I have a few. Not a business owner. I was just involved in these various situations. 1. We hired Ted because he was best friends with one of our best employees. The problem with Ted was that he liked to pleasure himself, like 10, 12 times a day. In the employee bathroom, he'd be in there for 8, 10 minutes each time, jacking it to beat the band. He had to go. This was the late 1980s. 2. Dave was the brother-in-law of the owner of the company. Dave was idiot. Dave needed to be on anti-whatever meds. Dave was married to the owner's sister and thus was immune from termination. One day, Dave got pissed off at something, stood on top of his desk and kicked his monitor off the desk, destroying it. In 2019, that might sound meh, but this was 2002, way before LCD flat-screen monitors were a thing. Idiot kicked a 19 inches card off the desk. How he didn't break his foot, I will never understand. He was quietly terminated, then complained to wifey, who complained to bro, and he was hired back. Idiot. 3. Carlos liked to gamble. This was in Las Vegas. He really liked to gamble. Company purchased the first Apple Macintosh laptop, which weighed like 10 pounds and cost $6,000. Carlos stole the ducking thing and pawned it for like $500 and gambled it away. Carlos, who also liked CK and blamed that for his thievery, was, instead of being arrested, sent away to recovery. This was about 1991. Carlos was let back in the company, whereupon he stole the petty cash box, about $4,000, and gambled that away. What I like about Carlos from a storytelling standpoint is that he was married 5 times to 3 different women. Married wife 1, divorced her, married wife 2, divorced her, remarried wife 1, divorced her, married wife 3, divorced her, then remarried wife 1 again. That guy was a snapped episode waiting to happen. 4. Casey liked substances. Oh, did he like substances? Being SVP of the company, he was of course issued a company Amex, which he used to get cash advances up to $5,000 to purchase substances. During a routine audit of the company's like 50 Amex business cards, we discovered that Casey not only blew $5,000 a month on substances, but he'd managed to furnish his entire house on the same company card. Casey liked to buy substances in LA and then drive back to Vegas with it. Someone, totally not me, really, but I think I know who did it, dropped an anonymous dime to the NHP about this, along with his license plate. One time, Casey made his drug run to LA and got stopped about 6 inches over the NV line. He got like 20 years. 5. Sammy liked his escorts, oh boy. So much that he used a company Amex, same company as number 3 and number 4 above, to pay for his escorts. Sammy was a regional manager in the Miami area for a company based in Las Vegas. 4 times a year, Sammy would travel to Vegas for meetings, and then sneak away to the chicken ranch or whatever to get his penis professionally polished. And since for sure, he wasn't going to put it on his personal card since his wife squinted at every bill line by line, he used the company Amex, bye-bye Sammy. 6. The business of the company for all of these, except number 2, was renting medical equipment to hospitals. Bassinets, IV poles, pulse oximeters, even defibrillators. So, let's call him Mark. Mark is a biomedical technician who inspects the equipment after the rental is over, cleaning it and testing it before re-renting. Testing a defibe means that you have to be sure when the doc dials 360 joules, the charge delivered is within approximately 5 joules. We have a tester for this. You dial the J on the defib, dial the expected J on the tester, wait for the defib to charge. Imagine all those scenes in doctor shows when they call clear, and then you put the paddles in the tester and pull the trigger. If the dialed J reading is within ~5J of what's delivered, you can clear that defib to return to service. The various defibs we had, though, had multiple power outputs. If you were using the defib in open heart surgery, for example, you'd want 5J or 10J, not 360, which is meant to go through your skin. Mark is working on a defib and decides to test its output. He sets it for 20J, and instead of putting the paddles in the tester, I'm not making this up, he puts on paddle on either of his temples and pulls the trigger. Yes, you read that right. This stupid idiot puts the damn paddles on his own body and pulls the trigger. Shot his ass about 6 feet off his stool, and he wasn't right for a day or 2. Legal got involved, and they made him go away, so that's probably the single stupidest reason a company I worked for had to fire someone. Story 50. Employee was videotaped smoking by a temp while on the clock. Employee figures the truth will come out, or the video will surface eventually, so he confesses before we knew the video existed. We're relatively liberal when it comes to substances, So we demoted him and put him through substance abuse counseling. Upon completion and a negative substance screen, he can resume his normal duties. Fast forward 2 months. Employee's position is reinstated. Everything is going well. Until I walked out to the patio one day to find a substances plant growing in a flower pot. The flower pot is in clear view of a security camera. Roll the footage back several weeks and there is said employee pulling seeds from a bag, placing them in various pots around the patio. He was let go the next day. Story 51. It was a manager of mine. He always asked for a ton of time off, and I always gave it to him. He put in time request form for 2 days that I blocked because I had something to do that weekend. I told him I'm sorry, but I can't give you those 2 days. It was to go to a wrestling show, which was what he normally asked days off for, not a funeral, wedding, etc. It was a Friday, and I walk in, and he had written a note hanging up saying he wasn't going to be coming into work that weekend and wished to continue working for me. Had to cancel my plans and fired the guy. Story 52. Left an open, half-full can of one of those spiked seltzers in his locker. The lockers have transparent doors, and he left it unlocked. His explanation? He found it on the side of the road, and he was planning on recycling it later. What a guy. It's not every day you see someone with that kind of commitment to sustainability. Story 53. Last year, one of our sales guys, a cocky crap, quit because he'd done an online video course on currency trading and had decided to set up his own hedge fund. No idea how he intended to, but probably an unregulated collective investment fund. Very much left with an attitude of, damn you losers, I made $30,000. No, he mixed up notional versus real. In the last month alone, I'm going to be rich. 6 months later, he's requesting references, applying for sales jobs online, etc. Messaged me to ask for help setting up a website. Get lost. Story 54. Hired a girl to answer the phone and sweep up really quick before close. Literally 10 minutes of sweeping max a day if you were slow as all crap. As far as the phone goes, there's literally nothing we can do for you on the phone. But customers have some sort of problem with not having a phone for a business, so she only had to say hello, hear them ask whatever it is, and say some variation of, I'm sorry we can't really do that over the phone, but our hours are such, and you can come on in, and we'll get you taken care of. This git made $100 a day to mostly sit around and play on Facebook or whatever she wanted. Instead, she chose to stand outside talking to her unemployed boyfriend on the sidewalk all day. The 1 day a week she'd actually show up, and she wouldn't even take the phone with her. I would still answer it. Then close came and she'd be nowhere to be found. About the 3rd week of, well, I guess she doesn't want to work here, I go to fire her ass and she starts hitting me with the, I'm pregnant, you can't fire a pregnant woman. If you fire me, I'm going to sue you for everything you have. It was so satisfying to watch her face unsmug itself as I said, you remember that contract I kept trying to get you to fill out? The one saying I hired you? Yeah, you don't work here, duck off. Also, she wasn't actually pregnant. Story 55. Not an owner, but former manager at a large pizza chain in Canada. I was the kitchen manager. It was a small tourist-driven town, so the workforce was slim pickings at best, so I always had to tread lightly. One gentleman who was Aboriginal was often confrontational to me. I was not from the town originally, so a lot of people were like, whoa, outsider here. Anyway, we butted heads a few times, but never anything serious. Probably didn't help I was 22 and he was 46. At any rate, one day, dude is making pizza. I noticed a few of them come out looking terrible. After about the 3rd one, I walk back to the pizza build area and say, X, can you please be just a bit more cautious when making pizzas? The cheese is uneven and the dough as well. Easy mistake, but it can make for poor quality on the other end and lead to remakes. To which I was met with, you don't have to attack me, and he walked out. 14 years of service. The manager above me was just around the corner and watched it unfold and was speechless. We thought he was just having a rough day and would be back the next day. Never returned. Story 56. Not a business owner, but I was a supervisor at a factory and got my buddy a job. 3 months in and he was doing a good job, and I was thinking about going to my boss to talk about promoting him to a level 2 job. It never came to that because he came in one day, went straight to my boss, and told him he's quitting by saying, I just need to look for better hours. I really think I can get paid playing softball. 3 years later and he still hasn't gotten paid. Story 57. I was only an assistant manager at the time and didn't fire her. I also didn't hire the dumbass. I used to work for a local chain burger place. We tried to teach this girl to bag the fries at first because we only had 2 fried products and it should have been simple, but she kept licking her fingers before she would grab a fry carton. I continuously had to tell her to wash her hands and try again. Our district manager showed up that day and got so frustrated with her that he told her to go clean up the lot. She then almost got hit by 2 cars in the parking lot because she wasn't looking where she was going. She got fired that day. She got hired at the donut shop next door after that. I went to get donuts one day. She licked her fingers before she grabbed the bag to put my donuts in and gave me the wrong change back. Story 58. I was the manager at a very physical job once, and the boss, ignoring my recommendation, hired this 85 pounds 18-year-old. Every day she was huffing and puffing and couldn't take the heat and fast pace. About a week later, I took the weekend to prep my speech about stepping it up, and Monday morning, it rained. 830 rolls around. Work starts at 8, and I call her and ask where she's at. She tells me she's running late because of the rain. I'm thinking, okay, I understand traffic can be worse. 930 rolls around and she's still not there. I call her again and ask what's going on. Apparently, she never left her house because she didn't have rain tires. I worked at Discount Tire for a year. You can't be Zabaser. I told her to not worry about coming in because she wasn't working out anyway, and she started to freak out over the phone. I calmly asked to verify her address and said your check will be mailed next payday and hung up. Story 59. He got in 2 fender benders in 1 month in a car he was driving. That was the company's and on personal time. I took it away and he threw a get fit and quit. Later found out he was smoking met, and that explains the rage. Story 60. I work for myself. I own a salon business. I do not have employees, but I have fired clients before. The first one because she joked a lot about beat her children and such. I just do not tolerate any of that. The second was because every time I would do her hair, she would come in with actual cartoon pictures and ask for her hair to be that. Always different from our original consultation, and always the opposite on the color wheel. I would tell her this is something to work towards and we can enjoy the middle ground fun colors in the meantime. She would agree, but would tell me about her hair and how it could handle bleach, etc. It really couldn't. I'd use my best bonders on her. With that in mind, I would go above and beyond with some really awesome hair colors. Always super close to the inspo pics. She would say she loved it. Tip me like $5 on a discounted $250 bill. Then go on Facebook and ask, what do you guys think I just don't know? And she'd get well over 100 likes every single time and just praise to the stylist she went to. So, about 1.5 years ago, I am a high-risk pregnancy. I had to drop my hours dramatically. I went 5 weeks early, knowing we were going to be spending a lot of time in NICU. I was upfront with all my clients about my son's life-saving surgeries he would need. We ended up doing 70 days. So I have my baby. Day 7, I get a message from this lady, SB for Skanky Git. SB, hey, can you get me in this week? Me, hi SB, I'm sorry I just had my baby and we are in the children's hospital. SB, yeah, I saw that. You think this next week would be good? Me, I had my baby a week ago, he just had surgery. I don't plan to come back to work for at least 6 weeks or more. Here is XYZ's number. They are taking over my clients while I am on leave. SB, yeah, well, I just figured you'd have extra time since he's in the hospital. Me, I ended up ghosting her and somehow she found me at my new location, so I had to tell her I didn't feel I was the right stylist for her and wished her the best with her new stylist. She still tries to book on my booking app every so often, and I keep canceling her appointments. Story 61. I used to own a business in Nebraska. My former coworker turned employee was short on cash one week. I lent him a couple $100 out of my pocket to pay his rent on a Friday. On Monday, I learned via Facebook that he went on a bender, blacked out, and woke up on a train to Denver with no money. He never came back. Story 62. I do not own Taco Bell, obviously, but I had a coworker when I worked there get fired for having sex with his girlfriend during his shift. They were always in her car, in the parking lot, in broad daylight. It happened 3 times before he got fired. Story 63. This one is kind of dark, but here goes. My ex owns a company that was in the process of expanding a few years ago. We needed someone to oversee the new facility, so we picked a reliable employee who had been with us since the beginning and was well-liked in the company. Things went smooth for a while until randomly he came to my ex crying and yelling at him about how the new job had ruined his marriage, among other things. A total mental breakdown. We tried to be understanding and gave him a couple days off to sort things out. He was good at his job and we didn't have anyone to replace him right away. He came back to work the following week only to be arrested mid-shift when the cops showed up looking for him. Turns out the night before he beat his wife, she had to have reconstructive surgery and then went looking for her supposed boyfriend, also one of our employees, who he beat. He had spent the night in his truck in the woods and came to work like nothing happened, not even knowing if his wife or the other guy had lived. Also, it turned out they weren't even having an affair, so the whole thing was just pointless. The replacement we hired was even worse. We fired him after he crashed his car into a field because he was high, having left work not even 5 minutes earlier. My ex witnessed it and the state he was in afterwards. Suddenly, it made a lot of sense why things just weren't getting done, and his job required him to operate machinery, so there was a safety issue as well. The confusing part is he offered to take a substances test to keep his job, which he failed. He didn't take the news well, and it ended with him telling my ex he would report him to ICIC despite the fact that he was born here and is a citizen. Story 64. Oppositely related, I was once fired for crashing my radio station's van, smacking the big antenna thing on top, into an underhanging sign at a car wash. To be perfectly fair, though, I had never driven one of the vans before and they were awkward to stop. Story 65. I hired a guy straight out of prison on the condition that he wasn't using anymore. He started using again almost immediately after I hired him. He would go into the restroom and shoot up every day after lunch, and would be useless for the rest of the day. He swore up and down he wasn't using, but I know he was from day one. I should have fired him right away, but I'm an ex-con myself and knew he would end up back in lockdown if I cut him loose. So I would keep him in the back after lunch so none of my customers could see him. The only reason he came to the front was to use the restroom, which my shop only had one of. This restroom was also where he would using. One day, I had a customer in the front end who was in charge of getting a fleet wrapped. Being a small fledgling company, this was a huge opportunity for us. During the course of our meeting, my customer excused herself to use the restroom. She came back shortly to inform me that there was a used syringe on my toilet seat. In that moment, I felt my heart dropped to my knees, as the fleet of wraps seemingly went up in smoke. My employee immediately accused the client of shooting up in our restroom and trying to frame him. Like without missing a beat, he came right out and said it. No one had accused him. He just immediately went on the defensive. He got to the point where he was screaming at the poor woman about trying to ruin his life. I'm not quick to anger, but I got pretty heated. Not only for his behavior, but because he seemingly had cost me my first big contract. So I snapped on him a bit. I told him to shut up and apologize. He of course turned on me, demanding to know why I believed that lying over him. I told him I'd known he was using from day one and that he had to get the duck off my property because he was fired. After yelling a few more threats and obscenities, he stormed out to his car, peeled out of my driveway, and got boned by oncoming traffic. No one was hurt, but he did end up getting sent back to jail. Story 66. I own a tree removal service. Hired this young kid a few years back. They all do great their first month. After that, most of them check out, become lazy, and avoid work at all costs possible. So this kid I hired no-shows 3 days in a row. I blew up his phone. Apparently, his grandpa up in Green Bay had a heart attack, so he rushed up there. He couldn't notify me because he didn't have my number saved in his phone, and looking up the company number online is way too high-tech for a young millennial. He assured me he'd be back in a few days ready to go. Later that day, we stopped at our usual gas station to fuel up our equipment. He's in a car with his dad filling up gas. At this point, you can probably feel out that he was lying to me about the grandpa situation. You'd think he'd be smart enough to avoid places where he might see people from work. I decided to go say hi. He didn't see me, and I knocked on his window. I asked, "Oh, you're back earlier. How's your grandpa? Is he going to make it?" The look of horror on his face and the confusion on his dad's said it all. He tells me, "I can tell you about it tomorrow." I said, "Nah, that's okay. I'll let you be someone else's disappointment. I'll mail your last check." Idiot. Story 67. Not mine, but my parents. A customer asked to have his key cut, and an employee said they couldn't cut that type of key. My dad caught the customer on the way out by accident and asked what he needed help with, eventually to tell him they could cut that type of key. The employee yelled at my dad and said, "If you ever second-guess me again, in gone." He walked out the door a week later because my dad second-guessed him. Some people? Story 68. At my previous job in a research capacity, our unit hired a very smart, young female who was very friendly. Our operating hours were standard business hours. On Friday morning of her first week, I was driving to work when I saw her walking on the side of the road where there was no sidewalk, with no jacket in the wintertime. This was an industrial area, so there was nowhere for her to go. I pulled over and invited her into the car. She immediately went off on a rant about how I was tricking her, how everyone in the office was gaslighting her, and then she went into some kind of rant about how people were watching her through her windows at home, and how she was being followed. It took me about 20 minutes to get her home, and she rambled the entire time. She hadn't slept or eaten for days, she'd said. Turns out she had gotten to the office early via the bus, walked into the office, and told whoever was there that she quit. Turned in all her stuff, then was going to walk to 10 miles home. After I got back to work, we called the police to do a welfare check. For weeks after, she would call us and just breathe into the phone, sometimes several times a day. She emailed, left messages asking for her job back. She even tried contacting me on Facebook. It was a shame because it was a really awesome job and she seemed pretty normal. Story 69. Not me, but my dad's best friend owns a small bar in the center of my local city. He got offered a high-paying job somewhere else, so got someone else to manage and run his own bar. This guy is hosting a wedding after party thing and realizes he's run out of CO2 for his drinks halfway through. Now I don't know a lot about this sort of thing, but I know the logical thing would be to 1. Shut down the kegs all night or 2. Try ring up and buy some quickly. Switch to cans, bottles, and offer some free shots or a discount to make up for it. Simple. This genius of a guy decides, no. You know what I'm going to do. I'm going to connect a fire extinguisher up to the system, to the drinks that people are drinking at a wedding reception, party thing. Surprisingly enough, people then complained that the drinks tasted awful, and there was a massive backlash. He was then promptly fired when the owner found out. It was a wonder that no one got hurt. Story 70. The director of HR walks into "I crap you, not a board of directors" meeting and says, "Am I the only one tired of all these damn Indians?" Smells like damn curry in this place. Story 71. I was working at a security company and made site lead at this Latino nightclub where I live. They always had live bands and such. One night, Chai Lazaraga, probably murdered that spelling, came and performed. He is a big deal in Latino music. I tried radioing this guard several times and no response. Had to leave my spot to go find him. One of the guards was a fan. So I out him on parking lot and then was going to have him do smoking area so he basically could watch the show. Me, hey guard, so is your radio working? Legit concern could be a safety issue for him or us. Guard, what? Me, pull out your radio and make sure it works. He pulls out his radio and it doesn't. Me, okay, I'll go get you a new radio, make sure to leave it on so we can get a hold of you. I put you on parking lot and I haven't seen you in a minute and we are at capacity. Can you go into the smoking area since it has calmed down now? Guard, why do I have to go to smoking area? Me, the owner wants someone in the smoking area like usual and I asked you to. Guard, no he doesn't. Me, yes he does. I have been at this site for 6 months now and nothing has changed. Please go to smoking area and I'll bring you a new radio that works. At this point, he goes and points at the head of indoor security. Guard, well, he's in charge, and he says that no one needs to be back there. Head of indoor, no, I'm not. And actual owner's name does want someone back there from outdoor security. Guard, man, damn this crap, I'm out at why you came at me so disrespectful like that. Me, look, all I'm asking is that you do your job. I'm site lead and I am only doing what the owner wants. Guard, damn this throws shirt on ground, I quit. I'm going to call and get you fired. Me, good luck with that. The owners of the security company called me later and asked what happened, and they were like, well, good riddance to that guy. Story 72. My company does a numerous amount of things outside of structured cabling and telecommunications work, one being digital signage installation. We were installing signage as part of a countrywide project, and during a stint of stores out towards Nevada, we received word from the manager of one of the locations that one of our techs was being rude. It came out later on that the manager had asked a minor question like, how's the install going, or what's the purpose of the signage? Let's face it, not everyone is as informed as we like, even managers. Anyway, rather than explain calmly, he went off and initiated his part of the conversation with, mind your own ducking business. We damn near lost the project because of one person's lack of tact or self-control. He was fired rather quickly after being flown home hours after the incident. Story 73. Oh, I have a story for this. My brother and I run a small business with about 5 casual employees who have a flexible roster. We had hired a young woman who was quite good with customers and had previous experience. We gave her a slightly higher than normal pay rate and a few extra responsibilities around the shop. Within a few weeks, it became evident she had a bit of an attitude about being asked to do things. Okay, we don't really care. A few weeks after that, she starts demanding 4 days a week. Okay, guess we can make that work. Week or so after that, she tells us that she can only work on 4 particular days of the coming week. We tell her we will accommodate this time, but we've had to shuffle other people around as a result. If she can't offer more availability, she might not always get the 4 days she wants. We have other staff who also have needs. She agrees, and things continue for another 2 weeks. At this point, we are a bit sick of her crap. Again, she tells us she only has 4 days available in the coming week. We do up the roster, and she has 3 shifts instead of her normal 4. Half an hour after the roster goes out, my brother receives a text message. Why don't I have my 4 shifts this week? To which he responds, we have other staff who also need shifts. If you can't give us full availability, we will do our best to accommodate you, but can't promise 4 shifts if you only give us 4 days availability. To which she responds, how damn hard is it to give me the shifts I want? I told you I need 4 shifts a week, and doing this roster isn't exactly hard crap. At that point, we had a good laugh, told her she had no shifts this week, and not to worry about being on the roster anymore. About 2 days later, we got a text from her saying, well, I'm glad we could come to an understanding. We still have a good laugh about that one. Story 74. I had an employee call on Monday morning that his dad died, so I gave him whatever time he needed. Well, Tuesday was the viewing, Wednesday was the funeral. Who showed up Wednesday? His dad. He had left his lunch bag on the table, and he didn't want his son to miss out on lunch. I was so shocked, I blurted out, Ernie's not here, he told me you died. The poor guy was shocked sick. I don't know what I should have done or said, but I probably shouldn't have said what I said, but I was shocked. Story 75. Maybe not obnoxious, but definitely stupid. I hired a girl to work reception at my last firm. She was young, pretty, good-natured, and generally good at the job. She had been taking a lot of time off, like 2 days a week for a number of weeks. Whatever. Maybe she's got some personal crap going on. It's a Monday, and she emails in sick after leaving early the previous Thursday and Friday. I happened to be looking at Facebook on my lunch hour and noticed that she had posted photos of herself with friends at a music festival that day. Posts on Thursday afternoon about a date with a friend to get nails done. Posts on Friday afternoon about shopping for her outfit. If you're going to skip work at a busy practice to go duck around in a field in a bikini high on substances, don't post it on social media, especially not when you are friends with your superior. Story 76. Just fired someone today because they decided they didn't want to work on Friday. Some weeks that's cool. They've known for 4 months. This month is a 5-day per week minimum month. One of my managers has a girlfriend that doesn't want him gone all week. So he says, "Can I leave tonight? I really need to get to a bank back home, 3 hours away from our job site." The next manager has his bags packed at noon, not even the end of the day, and says his dogs miss him. I love his dogs. But we all knew how this week was going on Monday, Friday. His dogs needed to have care in place before we left for the 5 days. He starts crying. I say, "Why, great. That's going to leave me with Jay and S as the only managers on Friday. A damn hectic day." Jay says, "No, boss, I'm leaving too." So I tell Jay I'll drop his paycheck off for him on Saturday and we'll be done. Kiss this job goodbye. I'm pissed. Jay says, "Well, my daughter's going in for surgery and I want to spend time with her." "Doc, man, why didn't you say that?" "She's going in for surgery. That makes a huge difference." I want to hug him. "Well, eventually," Jay says. "She'll be eventually going in and I need time with her." "Yeah, tonight was tough. I'm going to have to replace at least one of them." Story 77. This guy who I absolutely could not stand because he started his job by telling me I was going to hell for living with my boyfriend in sin, and he constantly caused a lot of trouble for me by being a compulsive liar, made me hate him pretty fat. But the worst he ever did was forge signatures for elderly people who were almost deaf, and one had dementia, by putting them in contracts with Verizon Wireless. He did this not knowing they were the county, district attorney's parents, and she got ready to sue fast. So to get out before he got fired, he interviewed for a job with @&T across the street, in the same town, while on the clock and walking around the sales floor. He quit the next day before the company could fully investigate. About a week later, when the attorney came into my work demanding to speak with him, I told her he quit and where to find him. She left and found him, and informed him she was suing him on behalf of her parents as their power of attorney. She came back to my work and asked me if I would help her get her parents out of the contract and get them a full refund, which I did. She proceeded to tell me all about the legal battle, and on behalf of helping here, she gave me her card and told me she owed me a favor. It was honestly the best thing that has ever happened at my job when it comes to karma. Story 78. An employee once snuck up behind another employee and picked him with a forklift, one fork between his legs. The victim suffered serious bruises. Story 79. I'll chime in. As an alcoholic, I drank at work mostly to stave off withdrawal. I find it obnoxious on my part. My bosses allowed me to resign so I could come back when I get well. Story 80. A company I once worked for was moments away from firing a young lady because she and the owner's son had broken up. He worked there too. Business of about 150 people. It was an amicable breakup. Mommy and Daddy thought it would be too hard on their 26-year-old son to have to see her all the time. HR had even typed up a recommendation letter outlining that she was a great employee, but they just couldn't put their son through this. I was able to shut it down like an hour before. Story 81. I fired a guy for claiming that for almost every single week for a year, at least one of the days was a holiday of some sort and wouldn't come in. But since you're not allowed to ask about religion or fire over religious stuff, it was quite difficult. He got fired when he was on the company feedback message board, getting into vulgar fights with people over crap. In almost every argument, he said something like, "That's why I'm an atheist," for some odd reason. Yep. Story 82. Started a new job in a call center. There was about 14 of us that went through a 2-week orientation at the same time. After not even being on the floor for a week, one girl from my orientation class asked a male team member if he'd be okay with her hooking up with his girlfriend if they let him in on the fun a little bit. He had another job a few years later where, again, was just finishing up training. One of the girls that had started with me no-showed without any explanation. Same thing the next day. She didn't show up and there was no word about her. A couple days later, my boss calls me up, which I knew was odd because he was the super crotchety type. He tells me that he's calling to inform me why Brianna wasn't showing up for the new job. Turns out the night before she flaked, she and her husband were the assailants involved in a drive-by shooting, where the victims both Zifiev Fetzfan. My boss learned about it because it was in the news, and he recognized her mugshot. I don't live in that area anymore. Story 83. I have a couple of these. 2 competing bars in the locker room. They ratted each other out and both got fired. Employee brandished a firearm at work while discussing the particulars of a loan with another employee. Employee came to work so drunk, he set the floor on fire. At time of substances test, his back was .30. Story 84. There's 2 standout ones I don't feel bad about. The first was a dude who got arrested for attempted murder during the middle of working with a client. The arrest, he didn't attempt murder in front of the client or anything. And it was a brand new client who never came back, unsurprisingly enough. Part of what made it so obnoxious was the crazy scene he caused because, of course, he couldn't just keep his mouth shut and cooperate. The other one was a dude who we had rehired under the stipulation that he was on a probationary period, so if he ducked up, he was gone. The dude ghosted on an important appointment with a client, and nobody was able to get in touch with him for like 2 or 3 days. When he rolled back up to work, his excuse was that he accidentally took a crap ton of ecstasy and was unable to function for those days. He was so blindsided by getting fired. Story 85. One of my patients told me this story. Patient owned a business where he hired someone who needed a place to stay. They worked out a deal where the new employee would stay in an RV parked at the store. As you might assume, this employee's commute was roughly 40 feet. He was fired for constantly being late to work. Story 86. I owned a shipping store. Paid clerks fairly well, starting $13.00 an hour. Usually college-age kids. Had an employee who, over a couple months, his drawer was always short. But not what you would think. Always somewhere between $2 to $10 and never an even hash, always some change. Anyways, I kept warning him to be careful, thinking he was just sloppy. No big deal, though. One time, he is a couple bucks short again, and I mention it, and he gets a little snippy. I have security cameras and decide to watch him during transactions. Turns out nearly every transaction he is literally pocketing. Small change. A dime. A nickel. Pennies. Still don't understand it. Story 87. I wasn't the boss, but rather a teenager working my first job. I worked at that video game store that buys your used games for a penny and wants you to reserve every game coming out ever. Anyway, we had just gotten a new assistant manager. Super nice girl, got along great, etc. One night we were closing together. She asked if I wanted pizza. I said sure, thinking we'd pitch in. Well, when the pizza arrives, she opens the register, pulls out a $20 bill, and pays the delivery guy with it. I ended up mentioning it to my store manager. Not because I wanted to get her in trouble, but because I was a stupid teenager and found it super odd as no other manager did that before while I was there. Turns out she'd been stealing and was fired soon after. Story 88. Dealing substances out of the back room of my bookstore was the deal breaker. 2 years later, I still have people come in and leave quickly when they see it's not him behind the counter. Story 89. I used to be a supervisor at McDonald's, and while I didn't have the capacity to fire someone, I was involved in a few hearings. Best one that stands out is a kid who used to come in late every time. Take hour-long breaks were half an hour, and get stoned across the road and walk back reeking of weed every single time. His final straw was when he came in high, dropped a burger in the deep fryer while trying to smuggle it out the back, spilled the Sunday mix all over the grills, and blatantly ate food on the preparation line in front of customers. He worked there for over a year, and I have no idea how he lasted that long. Story 90. This guy wasn't fired, but came close. He worked for my family's engineering company and drove one of the delivery trucks. He was famous for clocking in the morning, then disappearing for a couple of hours in the truck. One day, he came back, and the foreman saw him. He said something to the effect of, "Mick, did you get your hair cut this morning?" Mick said yes. Foreman says, "You think that's okay when you're on the clock?" Mick says, "It grows when I'm on the clock," and walks away. Story 91. Not a business owner, but a manager. I had to chastise my assistant for taking so many long, like 20 minutes, personal calls from his mother on company time. Instead of listening to me, he told me he was going to talk to his mom whenever she called, and I couldn't tell him not to. Then he told me he was psychic, and he could sense through these psychic powers that I was a bad person. He could feel my evilness from miles away. This after I'd bent over backwards to get him the job because I thought he needed help. I learned that helping someone out is a pretty bad reason to hire them. Yeah, fired him. Story 92. We provided a contractor to a Fortune 10 company. Day one, he is there. He sets up BitTorrent using their server farm and loads up every song in the history of the planet. Day two, he remotely sets up distributed computing as a hidden process on every computer in the company. It took a couple of weeks to work out why the internet and thousands of people's computers had ground to a halt, and he was fired instantly. Then he sued us for $25 million because no one told me that I couldn't do it. We were in court on and off for 3 freaking years, but eventuality it was dismissed. Story 93. Someone I worked with caught peeing in the trash can 3 times. For the first 2 times, they told him not to do that again and how it was unacceptable and stuff. He did it ducking 3 times. We were working at a coffee shop restaurant as servers. The trash can was in the kitchen and could be seen by the customers. Story 94. I used to work for a theater chain in a mall, and one morning my boss walked into the employee break room and found a pile of crap on the table. We grilled every employee about it and could not figure out who it was. We thought maybe it was a mall janitor. Fast forward 6 months later, and me, my boss, and the district manager come in to do a late-night viewing of Star Wars Episode 3, and we walk in on one of our high school employees taking a crap on the break room table. She pulled her pants up without wiping and ran out the door. We never heard from her again. Story 95. Had an employee at my small CNC machine shop that was partially government funded because he had a previous injury. He milked anything he could, from leaving early to not doing basic jobs that I know he was capable of. One day he comes to me and says we are out of inserts for a common cutting tool. Like we had zero, so production had to stop. I asked him why he didn't tell me when they were low instead of zero. He said, "Not my job." I fired him right there. Story 96. Selling beer to a minor in a sting operation. This person sold to a 17-year-old that presented her actual vertical ID. Vertical orientation means under 21, while ignoring the ID scanner 6 inches to the left and confirming a pop-up that reminds to check ID and includes the "do not sell before" date. The kid looked like they were 14, not 17. This was 24 hours after this employee took the mandatory alcohol serving course. The fine cost the employee their job and $400 and has cost my restaurant $5,000. The employee was very surprised that they were fired. Story 97. Used to work for a glazing company, got told a story about a salesman, door-to-door stuff, canvassing, who got into a negotiation with a woman about the pricing of her property to be done. They went inside and started looking at the brochures, and he asked if he could use her toilet. A few minutes goes by, and he doesn't come back, so naturally she goes looking for him. I crap you not. He was standing at the top of the stairs, and when asked what he was doing, he dropped his pants and replied, "Waiting for you to come take care of this." I heard some hilarious stories working there, but this has to be the best. Story 98. Guy shows up after being hired as a highly experienced roofer. He sets up the ladders and then tells me he's afraid of heights and he will need a couple of extra guys to get the work done. I told him that I would have guys there the next day, and he didn't need to show up. Story 99. Managed a local ice cream shop. A girl I hired kept using the restroom for insane amounts of time, like 25 minutes 4x on a 5-hour shift. Come to find out, she is lactose intolerant. She kept eating the ducking ice cream and getting sick every shift, and she wouldn't stop. Story 100. At my work, one of the operations managers would change the login password to some of the women he found really attractive, so he would be the one to help them and flirt with them. All the women pretty much turned him down, and then he got really nasty with them. A few of them reported him to HR, and that's when they noticed that he was the one changing all the passwords and fired him. Mad man. Story 101. Worked in a hospital. And registered nurse had been stealing patients' medication and hoarding it. The patients were given half of their regular doses and were complaining of extreme pain. This lasted about a month. To top it off, she was taking the medication while on the job and was high most of the time. She was terminated, reported to her college, and ended up being charged criminally. Story 102. A young girl who was a real hard worker stopped showing up for her shifts. When we called her phone, no answer. Her family also wouldn't answer. She came in a few weeks later after never calling, answering calls, or even contacting us. Her dad didn't like her in a high-risk of robbery job and made her stop showing up and stop answering. Story 103. The guy couldn't be located at any time. He'd randomly leave. He had like 50 grandmothers who all died whenever we had work deadlines. So he'd conveniently not be around. He'd never take blame for any work that didn't get completed by his team. It was ridiculous. Even when they fired him, he was nowhere to be found. Took them 5 days to find him and fire him. Story 104. Employee said her shoes were hurting her feet. Could she work barefoot? I told her no, as we are janitors cleaning a baseball stadium. She called me an idiot and quit. To add, she had just gotten to work, late. Story 105. She quit to start her own company that did exactly what we did, even using our same branding terminology, and asked several other office mates to join her. She was surprised and offended when I tried to enforce the non-compete. Story 106. My little sister was a bit of a spoiled girl in her late teens, early 20s. She once quit a job because the manager was a git. She kept trying to tell me what to do. Who does she think she is? Story 107. Back when I was a manager at a certain large video game retailer, I had to fire my ASM the day before Thanksgiving for stealing pre-orders. For Pokemon, from children.